is Art Viewing Adventures. I'm Rodney Paul, and I'm joined by Robert Tat, and we are hosted by the Community Living Campaign. And I know Nikki Trasvina, tell us about Community Living Campaign.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry I got off to a little bit of a rough start this morning or this afternoon, but I'm really glad to be here because Rodney always pulls in like great speakers, great topics, great audience, and the Community Living Campaign really appreciates, this having him part of our repertoire of speakers. So we're a nonprofit in San Francisco, and we benefit and advocate for seniors and for people with disabilities in San Francisco and elsewhere. And we bring lots of different types of programming online. We're especially interested in closing that digital divide that exists between seniors and tech and disabled people and tech. So if you have any seniors in your life that need help with using an iPad or using their phone or even using their desktop, get in touch with us because we have a lot of instruction that we could either do on the phone or online. It's really helpful. So that's one of the many programs we have. We also feature some exercise programs, self-defense, writing, a lot of different stuff. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Rodney. I'll let you and Robert take it away. It's going to be a good day.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nikki. And I also want to say that you're going to be back in a couple of weeks. You and I are going to do a program together on the Precita Eyes murals. So I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, welcome to another Art Viewing Adventures. And this one's really special because we're going to be talking about an artist who's an important photographer in San Francisco history, but also we're going to get some personal perspectives on her because Rob, I know you and Ruth Bernhard were good friends for the last decade of her life. So we'll be hearing about that. And Rob, I just want to say about you, you are a fellow museum guide at what we affectionately call the San Francisco Unnamed Museum of Art, which we won't say, they're a little shy, but it's a museum downtown that you would access from the Montgomery Street station. And also you are a fellow San Francisco City guide, and you do tours of the Castro that you were just talking about a couple minutes ago. In this being Pride Month, of course, that's a very big month for those tours. But welcome, Rob. Thanks for taking the time to be on Art Viewing Adventures. Why don't you tell us about Ruth Bernhard?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's always great to be here. It's always a lot of fun. So thanks so much, Rodney. So let me see the first slide up, if you could, please.
Oh, hold on a second, Rob.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second with this thing.
Sure.
I realize I have to take it back to the very top. And here we go with the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Wonderful. Great. Wonderful. Okay, thanks. So great. So yeah, as Rodney mentioned today, I want to tell you about my 10-year friendship with Ruth Bernhard. And I hope it'll provide really a framework for showing you her work and you getting an appreciation for her work. She was really a world famous photographer, classic photographer who lived in San Francisco. But more than that, she was an amazing person and just a marvelous, unusual, interesting person. And I think that through some of the personal stories and things that I'll tell you, you'll get a sense of what I mean. Slide. I first met Ruth in 1996, when I was working at Scott Nichols Gallery in downtown San Francisco. I was in the process of transitioning careers and becoming a photography dealer and kind of learning the ropes from working with Scott. And I had seen Ruth at various openings and so on. I had a few of her photographs in my collection already, but I didn't really know her. But on this Saturday afternoon, we had a book signing for Ruth in the gallery, and it was December. So at the end of the book signing, Ruth exclaimed, "Is there anyone here who would like to take me around Union Square so I can look at the Christmas decorations?" Slide. Well, I jumped at the opportunity, and so we walked around Union Square for about 2 hours, and she had this marvelous child's wonder about everything. We'd look in the windows at the, at the Christmas windows, and she'd say, "Oh, look at that look at that ornament, or look at the way they did this, or look at the shape of that," and so on and so forth. She loved the detail. And so this picture that you see here of her looking through the magnifier is very, very characteristic of Ruth and her personality. Slide, please. She ran me ragged that day. We walked around for about 2 hours. I later found out that she had a sore foot, but it didn't bother her, obviously. We stopped for tea at the St. Francis, and then we got a cab, and I took her home to her home in Pacific Heights. Slide. The house that she had lived in for many years. And thus began a 10-year friendship with Ruth, which basically lasted until she passed away. I stayed in touch with Ruth, and as I said, and we would get together occasionally. I'd take her on errands and so on. Slide. Sometimes we'd go to the museum. And whenever I was out with Ruth, whatever we were doing, it was always just such a joy to be with her, because she was such a fun, interesting, engaged a person. And we would be walking along the street, and she would love to, all of a sudden she'd stop and she'd say, she always called me Robert. So she'd say, "Now, Robert, what do you see here?" And this is how she taught. She taught her students how to see. And this was what was so wonderful about being with her. Any place that you could stop and look, there was something to be seen. And it was all about learning to see it, learning to find the beauty in something. Slide. So let's get into her work. Ruth's work is primarily studio based, and of course she's best known for her female nudes. And as we put in the course description that you probably saw, Ansel Adams, of course, gave her the accolade of calling her the greatest photographer of the female nude. But she also had a whole nother body of work, if you'll excuse the expression. Slide. Which was the common objects, and we'll also be talking about those, which are a little bit lesser known. Slide. Let's start with this one, though, the classic torso from 1952. So when you look at this slide, what do you see? What do you notice? What comes up for you?
I'll answer first, Rob, but I encourage others to jump in after me. I really notice, first of all, the contrast between the dark behind the woman and then the tones of the skin, which are very, there's a real fine gradation of those tones. Also the curves, I'm seeing like some really wonderful curvy lines, and the way it flows to me is really extraordinary.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, you can either unmute and share your thoughts, or go ahead and tell us in chat.
This is very intriguing for me.
It's very intriguing for you, Paco.
That's about thinking about what's going on too.
Thank you, Paco. In a couple comments from chat, I see Gail says she notices soft angularity. And then I hope I'm saying this right. Elise says angles in light and shadows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're beginning to get at the strength of Bernhardt's magic, her art in the female nude. Let's take a look at another one. Slide. This one is called Knees and Arm. It's a little bit different than the previous. Further thoughts come up around this one?
Well, to me, like this black background is really wonderful. And then it's really luminous against that black background. And again, we're seeing like curves, and she obviously loves having her models do these kind of unusual contortions. And then it's abstract, really. This is you could almost not know what this is a picture of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you bring up a couple good points, Rodney. She was very, very particular in terms of posing her models. And there are some films of her doing this, showing that and how she would work with her models and, you know, move an arm or a finger or just a little bit just to get the right, you know, the right position, and very, very carefully pose the model. So it was not at all by accident. It was all very, very carefully conceived. And then, of course, the whole idea of the using the light to bring out the form. And I think there's another couple comments there.
Yeah, let me read a couple of them. So Marcia says, I thought about where Ruth was standing, and the right leg looks like a breadstick. That's a great observation. I couldn't agree with you more, Marcia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paco says this is very detailed posing.
Yep.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
Judy says very sculptural.
Yes. Yes.
And
Exactly.
Gail, beauty of the nude without the distraction of sexuality.
Very important point. Yeah. Very important point. Yeah.
And then one more, Sherry says, we're only seeing the right leg down to the knee, and it seems very long. It looks like a hot dog to me.
So breadstick or a hot dog? Huh? It's funny.
It's a baseball season, right?
Yeah, there you go. Well, you know, this point that you raise about a non-erotic pose, it was often commented on because, you know, most nudes, most female nudes were made by male photographers. But here you have a female photographer photographing other women. So the intent was not eroticism, but the intent, as we'll see in further of her work, really was to, you know, she almost uses the model almost, you know, as a sculptor would use clay, you know, to create the form that she wants with the light and the shadow and the posing and so on. She's interested in the texture. It's almost as if she's photographing a sand dune. And well, we'll see a photograph later on, which is actually called Sand Dune, and you'll see what I mean. Slide. It's something a little bit different, a little bit more straightforward. We don't need to. I don't want to necessarily comment on all these pictures, but if you have something you want to say, speak
the
up.
one thing I'll notice is, you know, this one's really light. You know, this one, as opposed to the last one with the black background. Yeah. This one, you know, is so much lighter. Yeah. Yeah. Quite, you know, a different time, different idea. And here you do see a face, a head, a face. So, you know, it's a little bit more figurative as opposed to abstract. And I see Sherry has her hand raised. Why don't you go ahead, Sherry?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's the same model, because the thigh, the upper leg is very long again, unless she may be very tall, but it just. Yeah, I don't know. It's possible. You know, I don't know. She did have favorite models she used over and over. So it's possible. What was the other one? 67, 76? What was the date on the previous one? That's 76. Yeah, it's possible, although it's quite a bit of difference in time. It's funny because you don't see the same body parts, so it's hard to really compare. It's hard to tell, yeah, and that's what I mean. As I say, it's not as abstract as the other. Slide. Okay, and the question from Marcia is: Go ahead. Is the model a dancer? That pose requires flexibility to get a knee by the jaw. Yeah, I was thinking that same thought, Marcia, that if I made a pose like this, I'd probably have to go to the hospital. Yeah, good question. I don't know if she was a dancer or not. I mean, she worked with dancers, certainly. I mean, she worked with anyone who I think that she felt had an interesting body that she could work with, and certainly dancers would probably be in that category. Also, notice the background. Notice that it's not just a plain background; it has a texture. See, there's almost as if she's on a cloth or something. There's a little bit of a texture on the floor, which is nice. Slide. This is something quite different than the others that we've seen. It's called Luminous Body, and gee, how do you react to that? It's really a departure from the other pieces that we've seen. Yeah, it's kind of surreal, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It just seems very dreamlike, and it's kind of hard to read the image. Like, what are we like? How did she do this? What are we really looking at? Those are the questions I have.
Yeah, and you're seeing the face in this case. So
Yeah, I'd love to hear what thoughts others have in the group. And we're not a big group, so if anyone, you just
Yeah.
want to unmute and share a thought, that's fine, or just throw it into chat. I see Paco has written, she's dreaming about what she wants to do. But he gets a sense of like almost a dreamer, a sleeping person, perhaps.
I could see that. That's a good interpretation, I think.
The shadows on her body are hard to understand. I mean, it looks like there's a hole on the left and then 3 protruding shadows, and
Yeah,
I can't figure them out.
yeah, I think I'm not sure, but I believe she's lying or pushed against a piece of glass, and that's what's causing these, the 3 dark bulges, if you will. That it's the body against the glass, and also her hair. I think that's what's going on there. So it makes for this, and then of course the lighting accentuates it. So on the right side you see kind of the natural form, and in the middle you see this sort of pressed against the glass, and so it is this odd combination of what is almost a figurative piece where you actually see the model, but then this strange abstract overlay, this that caused by these strange dark spots in the middle. So really a very interesting kind of a hybrid approach.
Is it notable that 1962 is kind of earlier in her career, and maybe she's doing some experimenting that she moved away from?
Yeah, yes, exactly. You do see as you look at the photographs in a chronology, and we're only really showing just a few. There's many more, but if you look at them, you can see a evolution of styles and different ideas that she explored over the years. Slide. So here is Perspective 2, which is one of her most famous photographs, and one of her most popular ones, actually. And this is 67. Why do you think this is so popular? What do you see here, maybe in terms of the evolution of the style from what we've seen so far?
Well, again, I wonder, this black background is really intriguing, and it makes the body kind of pop out. There's a diagonal going on here that I think is really, something alluring about that, the curve. So it's almost a straight line, but not quite. And I'll read some of the comments in chat. Marcia says, there is such a pleasing line from the right hip to the left elbow. And Sarah says, beautiful triangles. Paco, this is so poignant. And Judy, if you squint, one can almost see this as a landscape. Oh, that's a great, it's like almost like a mountain.
Yes. All those points are right on. Again, you see the very careful posing of the model, the way the arm is set, and the way the 2 legs lie over each other. What you're talking about there, the very careful pose, the beautiful line that's created, the dark background, the black background, and this whole idea that it's almost like she's photographing a sand dune, not a nude. It's all about the form.
And I want to call out a comment. Actually, I missed a comment from Joanne early on, but she brings it up again. She says her lighting is so specific, and I do think that's a great observation that there's some really amazing lighting going on here. Isn't that right, Rob?
Yes, absolutely. She was a master technician at lighting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But you can see that, and again, these photographs took hours and hours and hours to do, maybe over a period of several days. Very carefully thought out, and we'll talk about her process a little bit more later on.
One more comment from Erica. She says, this is really beautiful. The triangle shapes are very soothing. It's sort of soft focus, contrast with the prior photo, which was almost spooky and somewhat unsettling.
Yes, good comment. Yeah. Slide. Here's a quote from Ruth. Basically, what we've been talking about. Light is my inspiration, my paint and brush. It is as vital as the model itself. So you're really seeing that in what we've talked about, and you've all basically commented about that. How the light is defining the picture so much. So with that in mind, slide. I thought it'd be interesting to compare and contrast these two, the first one that we saw, and then this later one, and is really sort of the range of style, if you will, side by side. What comes up when you see the two side by side? What thoughts?
And again, I'm going to encourage folks in the audience to chime in on this. So what they have in common, again, we see these curves, these very soft curves that kind of flow across the photograph. But we do see very different backgrounds. And in both cases, I think the lighting is kind of the key, right? Like it's just, she's getting this wonderful luminosity using this lighting. Elise says the one on the right is more sensuous. Michelle says the first is many rectangles, while the second is triangles. Great observations.
Yeah. And I think you could say the one on the left is a little bit more erotic because you're seeing more recognizable body parts, the nipple and so on, the breast. But the one on the right really is, yes, it's all form. It's all about form and using the body as form. So it kind of doesn't. You do see in the contrast here. You see all the things that we've been talking about. The idea of the use of light to define the shape. In the one on the right, of course, she's gotten much more dramatic with the black background and the sharp contrast, as the one on the left is a softer all around, and you see a defined background, a horizon line, if you will. It's a little bit of the head. It's much more of a figurative piece. It feels more like a nude. Was the one on the right feels much more abstract to me.
But in both cases, Rob, we don't see a face.
That's right.
And so this is not, you don't see a lot of nudes photographed in this way.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
It's like she's really carved out her own territory.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, this idea of a woman photographing other women, and not with the intention of it being erotic. And there's some controversy around that statement, which we'll get to if we have a chance to talk about later. But in the meantime, I want to move off of the nudes. We'll look at some more later. But slide. Let's take a look at some of the other part of Ruth's oeuvre, and that is the common objects. So these are 10 photographs that were released in a portfolio called "The Gift of the Commonplace" in 1994, and these are 10 of her most popular common object photographs. Slide. And we'll start with this one, which I love. And a lot of Ruth's photographs have stories behind them, and she would always love to tell the story about the photograph. And this is a good one. She found this. It's a crushed teapot. She found it on the street. It had been crushed by a truck or a car running over it, and she picked it up and brought it into the studio and set it up against this velvet background. And this is the photograph that results from that, with very careful lighting and composition and so on. And it's a wonderful example of how Ruth has this gift for transforming the ordinary into something that's extraordinary beauty. And when you talk about Robert, what do you see here? Here she finds what is a piece of junk on the street to most of us and makes a beautiful photograph out of it. Thoughts about this?
Well, you know, it reminds me of like Marcel Duchamp, who takes like objects and turns them into art. You know, and I'm not just thinking about the urinal, but also just like how he took bicycle wheels.
Yes.
And so kind of recontextualizes these things to turn them into art. And so she's taken this, and you know, she's taken this teapot, but I think it's also really notable the background. You know, like I don't even know what it is, but it's something that really adds a lot of intrigue to the image.
Yeah, I think it's velvet. I believe, but the way it's set up is very, yeah, the way it's lit, yeah, it's very.
It makes me think of the steam that would be coming out of the tea kettle.
Yeah. You're right. It's kind of ethereal, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And it also really echoes the shadow, you know, the shadowing on the metal, you know, beautifully echoes that in terms of the softness, the wave of the background, the wave of the shadow.
We've got a few interesting comments. Marcia says, I'm enjoying her artistic gaze take on these forms. And I see a purse image combined with the spout and such. And is that spilt milk there? Gail says, it has a feel of Trompe d'oeil painting. And then Erica says, it would be so interesting to see these photos in color. It just wouldn't hit. I would love to see how she had her lights set up. And maybe, did you get a chance to see that, Rob, at some point?
No, but there are films. There's a film about her where you do see her working in the studio and working with her lights and so on. So if you go on, you could probably find it on YouTube. But there's one major film that was done about her, and she taught classes in that. So yes, yeah.
And then a thought from Bernice, I would never have thought of a squash teapot as so sensual.
Yes.
And then Paco is saying it looks like, he says, literally, it looks like a purse.
Yeah. It does look like a purse. Yeah. Interesting would be actually to compare this to a nude, wouldn't it? Because there is a sensuality about it. It's kind of interesting.
Well, in that lighting, like the way the lighting kind of flows, the gradations, that's very much echoing her nudes, I think.
Yeah. And Erica mentioned about the color, you know, to see it in color to understand, you know, what it was and so on, but better. But you know, I think it's a wonderful example of how sometimes I always like to tell people there's more color in a black and white photograph than there is in a color photograph, because your mind has to you know, contribute, has to think about, well, you know, what is this? What are the colors here? You know, and so you participate more in the image by as such. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, slide.
Yeah, it just makes me want to, like, you know, look for more stuff in the street, right?
Yeah, really, really. Found objects, you know. Well, this is Ruth's first photograph, or I should say, first fine art photograph. We'll talk a little bit more in a couple of minutes about how it came about. But from 1936, it's called The Creation, and of course, you can see it's objects. It's the mannequin, looks like probably a wooden hand, and the doll's head and some kind of background. And I've always been intrigued by this, the creation. What's this picture about?
Well, definitely it brings to mind a story, right? Like there's a baby sleeping in a hand. Of course, it's not a real baby and it's not a real hand. And then this kind of scene, this idyllic scene in the background. And, you know, could you imagine a story that this might evoke? You know, it kind of, you know, so it's called Creation, and you know, it's her, you know, she has literally created this, but maybe it inspires us to try to create a story that might be the background to this whole thing. Anybody
have any stories they'd like to put forward?
I mean, this almost strikes me as some kind of mythology, you know, like this is like in the beginning.
And maybe that's it. Maybe that it's her first fine art piece. Maybe that's why she calls it Creation. You know, it's her first creation, if you will, because up until then she'd been doing, you know, much more straightforward kind of commercial work. So
And Michelle is really going with the creations. He says, lifting Adam out of Earth's soil.
yeah,
Like this is the beginning, right? This is the Garden of Eden or something, right? That's great.
yeah,
Other
yeah.
thoughts? Yes, and God is a woman, says Sarah.
There you go. Yeah. Well, let's move along. We got lots to look at here. Slide.
Okay.
Here's another wonderful common objects, lifesavers. Again, something that you would find in your pocket. And Ruth loves the form of them and then uses pattern and repetition and shadow to make this wonderful picture. I need to move along a little bit. Next slide, please. We'll talk about this picture a little bit more detail called Two Leaves. It's one of my favorites. And slide. There's a quote. She says, "My quest through the magic of light and shadow is to isolate, to simplify, and to give emphasis to form with the greatest clarity." So, slide. So let's kind of use that as a jumping off, and let's go back to our favorite perspective two then. And what do you find similar about these two pictures?
One thing I really notice is the curves, right?
Mhm.
Like she's found these leaves that have curves along their outside, and they're, the same thing she does with the model. She lights it up kind of perfectly to accentuate the lines. And then, kind of the contrast of dark and light that she's able to achieve here. So we see part of the leaf and part of it's dark. Sherry says the light shadow. So we
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
Elise is also commenting on the lighting. And Gail says texture of the hair and the veins in the leaves. So we get some really nice texture in both these photographs.
Yeah, yeah. Again, that definition and the texture, bringing out the lighting. Yes, all of that. Yeah, exactly. We have a video here, but Rodney, I think I'm going to skip over it for now because I want to make sure that we get through all the slides, and we'll come back to it if we have a chance. I have a video of Ruth talking, and hopefully we'll have a chance to show you that. But we'll come back to it. But I wanted to tell you a bit about Ruth's background and her life. She, I don't know why it says test there.
I don't
Anyway,
either.
yeah, anyway. Ruth was born in Berlin in 1905. And as you can see, she died in San Francisco at 101 in 2006. Her parents were divorced, and she was raised by two school teacher sisters and their mother. She had a rather sad childhood. Her father was a well-known poster and typeface designer, and designed many typefaces, which are called Bernhard, and you'll see them. You may have Bernhard Modern actually on your Mac computer. It's one of the Mac fonts. Slide. Ruth studied art history and typography at the Berlin Academy of Fine Arts before she moved to New York City in 1927 to join her father. And there she worked as a photographic assistant for Ralph Steiner, who was a fine art photographer, fairly well known, and then did commercial work on her own. A slide. And one of the commissions that she got was from the Museum of Modern Art, 1934. They did an exhibition called Machine Art. And here you see a page of the catalog. Ruth did all of the photographs in the catalog, and it was the exhibition was about basically a design exhibition about the beauty in the design of objects, machine-made objects for various purposes. Slide. And so all of these objects were sent to Ruth's studio to be photographed, including this big commercial a mixing bowl, which is several feet in diameter. And she was working with an assistant, and she had an idea and asked the assistant if she'd be willing to crawl into the bowl and pose. Slide. And this is the photograph that resulted from that, called In the Circle. And there were several of these done with the assistant in the big mixing bowl. And these really are Ruth's first nude photographs, first female nudes. So while these are quite different than the later ones that we've been looking at with the lighting and all of that, you can begin to see her style emerging here, I think, even though they're not as sophisticated as the later work. You get to see the sense of the posing and the shapes and the emphasis. She didn't quite yet know how to bring all that out that she got so good at later on. Slide. A real turning point in Ruth's career and in her life really occurred in 1935 when she had a chance meeting on a beach in Santa Monica with the great photographer Edward Weston. Weston, as you probably know, is one of the greatest 20th century American photographers and modernists. Some would say the greatest, and that's another lecture for another day. Slide.
Sure. And I do want to read a comment from Joanne.
Yes, please.
Regarding she says she saw something that said the woman in the bowl is a dancer friend.
It could be. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, I believe. I thought that she was working with her as an assistant, but yeah, could be a dancer friend.
Yeah, and then Gail's saying that is one big mixing bowl. Yes,
it sure is. It's a commercial mixing bowl. Yeah. Yeah, talk about a scale reference. In any event, yeah, thanks for that. When Ruth saw Weston's work, it was really a revelation to her, because she realized that she, as a photographer, could do much more than just be a craftsperson. That she knew the craft of photography, but she wanted to make art, and she wanted to be an artist, and she realized that she could use photography to make art. That photography could be art. Slide. Here's what she wrote about this revelation. She said, "I was unprepared for the experience of seeing his pictures for the first time, Weston's pictures for the first time. Here before me was indisputable evidence of what I had thought possible, an intensely vital artist whose medium was photography." So this really changed her whole direction. Slide. She moved to Carmel to be with Weston and work with him. Here's a photograph that he did of her in 1935. She found it difficult living in Carmel. She was working as a portrait photographer, so she moved to Hollywood and continued her work there as doing portrait work and commercial work, and also developing her fine artwork. Slide. And in 1953, she moved to San Francisco. And there she already having established herself already as a fine art photographer, she became part of this wonderful group of colleagues, people such as Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham, Brett Weston, Minor White, Wynne Bullock, to name just a few. This wonderful pantheon of photographers who are all in their prime, working in this golden age of California photography in the mid 20th century. Slide. Ruth loved shells, and this piece called Shell and Driftwood. She loved walking on the beach and finding shells and collecting them. I don't know if that's what she was doing when she met Edward Weston, possibly so. But I want to look at one in particular here. Slide. And that is angel wings. I actually have this in my own collection, and I always thought it's just such a beautiful photograph. And it's a good photograph for us to talk about her technique, because we talked a little bit about her lighting and her posing of the models and so on. But Ruth explained when she'd show this picture that a photograph like this might take hours to photograph, and she would work at night, maybe over the period of a few days, setting it up, and then she used little teeny lights to get the lighting, the little glints of light where she wanted it, constantly looking through her lens, and she was a very intuitive person, and she always said that, when she felt the photograph was right, then she'd make just one exposure. Slide. And she was always proud of that fact. She always used to say, I only make one negative. So she didn't believe in making a whole lot of different versions and different versions of a photograph and then picking the best one, different exposures and so on and so forth. She didn't work that way. She worked very intuitively, and when she felt it was right, she made just that one exposure. And Ruth once said, and I love this, everything happens just the way it is supposed to happen. How else could it happen? So that was her. It gives a sense of her intuitive feeling about life, the way she approached life. Slide. So let's do another compare and contrast here. Angel wings with a nude that we haven't seen yet. This is called Two Forms. And Ruth was a strong believer in the equality of the races, and did several photographs featuring black and white to stress that belief and to illustrate it. And so here you have one of those. So I think it's an interesting compare and contrast, similarities, differences. Now I'm not talking about subject matter, but more about similarities or differences as photographs. What do you see?
One thing I'm noticing is there's like pairings in these two photographs. Actually, it brings to mind the one of the leaves also.
Yeah.
Pairings. Erica's mentioning the curves, the verticality. Also contrasts in light and dark.
Yeah.
Kind of wonderfully done, and especially with that hand that kind of pops out with the dark background.
Yeah, that hand really compositionally, look how important that hand is to the composition. Think about what the picture would be without that hand. Be entirely different. Would not be anywhere near as successful, I don't think.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Rob. I think that is just like, that's where your eye is drawn.
Yep.
When you see this photograph.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? I think it is like a great way to talk about bringing the races together at a time when that was sadly controversial.
That's right. Yeah.
Erica says she's almost used the two body forms to create the same feeling that she created using the negative space with the shells.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah.
And Parker says they are hugging each other. Yes, it's an embrace, isn't it?
And just to define and make sure everybody understands that negative space. Negative space is the in an image is the the space where the object is not. So in other words, in the shells are the positive space, and the sand below. The negative space would be the background. So that would be that's
using that to frame
negative space.
Right,
Yes,
she's
exactly.
using that to frame both of these images.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on. Slide. We can't do a survey of Ruth Bernhard's work, of course, without talking about In the Box Horizontal, which is her most famous photograph, and it's become an icon of photographic modernism. And again, Ruth has a wonderful story to tell about the making of the photograph. She was standing in the front of her house one day and looking out on the street from her window, and she saw the UPS driver delivering this box to a neighbor across the street. It actually contained a photographic enlarger. but she had this vision of the model in the box. So she went over and asked the neighbor if she could have the box, and went into the studio with the model. And this is the photograph that resulted from that, her most famous image. Why do you think this photograph is so popular?
Start first. First of all, it's a photograph that kind of has its own frame. So the box is sort of framing the model. But then she breaks the frame, by putting her arm outside of the box. I think that's a wonderful element. It's a wonderful contrast, so again, she gets that background in the negative space of the box. It's her curves, the breadsticks that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And then it's really intriguing that, we have the frame, but then we have a frame within the frame, because we have this negative space of the whole photograph, with a wonderful gradation there, going from dark to light. Those are the things that strike me. What are other people seeing? And it's a great story too, Rob. I always love hearing these stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's her story.
Behind
her
these images.
Yeah.
I think we often tell each other stories about what we're seeing. And to get the actual story from the artist is always fun.
It's interesting. Yeah. Well, anyway, okay, there's a comment. Yeah.
Unique and different.
Yeah. Well, maybe, I mean, it's like I say, it's a famous photograph. Maybe it's not something that we can describe. It just, people like it. What can I say?
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
She says her expression adds so much. I'd love to hear more from you, Judy, about that. If you want to unmute and tell us what you think it adds, that would be great. Gail says the curve of the eyebrows, eyelids, headband, and breast.
Yeah.
Bernice, it's so interesting to see the inclusion of the lighter background on top. It makes such a difference. Erica says she gets double the shadows because of the box. Oh, that's a great point.
Yep.
And then, Marcia says exceeding the boundaries of the box. Like outside of the box, right?
Think outside the box. Huh?
Yeah. Be outside the box.
It seems like she's already dead, Rodney.
She seems, say that again, Paco.
It seems like she's already dead.
Seems like she's already dead. Oh, I think she looks really comfortable to me. She looks, I mean, she does look really, and I don't know if you often see this in nude photographs, but the sense like she is very much at ease.
Yeah, she looks very content to me, And I agree that the head is very interesting. I agree, the headband and the face, the posing of the eye, the position of the eyes, it's just beautiful. Again, the posing is magnificent. The position of the body is magnificent that she's achieved.
And see, Sherry has her hand raised. Go ahead, Sherry.
My first glance at it, and I don't know this one, I know some of her other pictures, was a box that's body size is usually a coffin.
Yes.
And that's completely not what's happening here. So that's just in the back of my mind.
Yeah. Interesting thought. Yeah.
And Paco was kind of going in that direction too. And, maybe it's like a serene death pose.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you that sometimes the photograph is printed differently. Sometimes the background is printed very dark. And so the light top part is dark. And so that would create a much more ominous feeling, I suppose, Yeah. Well, we should move on. This is a book that was published, The Eternal Body, published in the 80s. And it really is the book that Ruth always credited with kind of putting her on the map. It was so very important to her in terms of her future career and the public recognition of her as a fine art photographer. And today, of course, Ruth's work is represented in many private collections and many museums worldwide.
Has there been a retrospective of her work, Rob?
I don't know if there has been or not. It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe there will be at some point because she's been gone a few years now,
You'd think our local modern art museum might want to do that.
Yes,
She
you'd
was a
think.
San Francisco photographer.
Yes, you would think, wouldn't you? Okay, anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
Slide. Another whole area of Ruth's life was her teaching career, and it's very important. It was very important to her. And it started in 1967. She started doing classes and workshops and did many over the years because she wanted to pass on her skill and her philosophy as an artist to younger photographers, to other photographers, and to mentor. And she was always very encouraging to photographers. Anyone who called her up and said, "Can I come over and show you her portfolio, my portfolio?" She'd always say yes. She always was happy to see people. And because of that, she had many devoted followers and students. Slide. And her openings were mobbed with what we used to call Ruth Bernhard groupies. Well, this is what she would tell her students. She says, if you can't make the image bigger or more important than what you see, then don't push the button." So slide. And here she is in this is at a booth that I was showing my photographs at an art fair, Photo San Francisco, a few years before she died, and she came to see the booth. And before you know it, here she is sitting down with a whole group of people gathered around, and she's holding court. People just loved listening to her, being with her, as you can see here. They're just so fascinated with her as a fascinating person.
She's in her late 90s in that photograph, right?
No, she'd be probably mid 90s, maybe mid 90s at this point. Yeah. Slide. And this I think is a wonderful example of how Ruth taught. It's a crystal doorknob. These were found in many old houses in San Francisco, and it's merely a photograph of light from the window coming in and hitting the doorknob in just a particular way. And it's a wonderful example of the way that Ruth taught her students how to see. You remember the Robert, "What do you see here?" And that's what she would constantly challenge her students with. And she had a wonderful assignment that she always would give in her classes, and that was this. She would say, find an object within 10 feet of your bed and make a photograph of it. And the idea being that something in your everyday environment that you probably see every day, but find something that you can make a beautiful picture of. And yes.
So for me, that would be my iPhone charger.
Yes. Which is no doubt beautifully designed, as are all Apple products, right?
Yes.
Thanks to Steve Jobs. And Ruth would always say, you make a photograph. You don't shoot a photograph. She always used to say, shooting is for guns. So, you make a photograph. And again, it's this idea that you find it, and when it's right, you make the photograph. You find the beauty and you make it. And again, that's so much what she taught. Slide. If you want to know more about Ruth Bernhard, this is a wonderful book I'd recommend. Between Art and Life. It's a picture biography that was written with Margarita Mitchell, who is also a wonderful photographer in her own right, and it's photographs of all about Ruth's life, and really a full biography of Ruth. Slide. So that's some of Ruth's work and some of my personal remembrances of her and of our friendship. Here we are at her 100th birthday party. And I want to leave you with a final bit of Bernhardt wisdom. And it really is a summary of much of what we talked about today. It really is a summary of her philosophy in life and her philosophy as a photographer. Slide. It's this recipe for a long, happy life. And it was in the book, but also she had copies of it she would give out to people, written in 1995. And of course, she had a marvelous life. She had a long, happy life of over 100 years. I want to read these along with you. Never get used to anything. Hold on to the child in you. Keep your curiosity alive. Trust your intuition. Delight in simple things. Say yes to life with passion. Fall madly in love with the world. Slide. And her credo, remember today is the day. She always would say, today is the day. And that's really all you need to know to appreciate my beloved friend, Ruth Bernhard. So thanks for coming along with me on this sentimental journey.
Well, thank you, Rob. And I want to add a ninth rule, which is if an artist asks you to accompany them walking around Union Square, always say yes.
Yes, always say yes.
So
Ruth,
great job,
Ruth always
Rob.
used to say, I always say yes. He always used to say that, no matter what somebody asked her, could you do this? Could you photograph that? She would always say yes. And then she'd figure out how to do it. She never turned down anything. And it's a wonderful philosophy of life.
So we have a few questions for you, Rob, but I see
Yeah.
Sherry has her hand raised. So first we'll have Sherry, go ahead.
Okay, two quick questions. Where was her 100th birthday party, and did you attend her funeral?
The 100th birthday party was at Fleur de Lis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she threw a wonderful party for her friends, and it was really lovely. People came from all over the place, to attend. I think her brother came from Germany, and so on. I didn't attend her funeral. There was a memorial service for her,
Uh-huh.
and I attended that. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
We had an earlier question about whether she did her own developing.
Yes, she did. Yes, she had a little dark room off of her kitchen.
Wow.
And that's where she printed most of these wonderful photographs. Yeah, she did all of that herself. She started photographing during the Depression, and I think she learned to do things very directly and without waste. And some people say that this idea that I only make one negative was that the idea that she couldn't afford to make more than one, that it had to be right the first time. But she shot in a large format. Film was expensive, but yeah, she did her own developing in this darkroom, and she was a master printer. She taught many other photographers how to print, and Michael Kenna, who was a very well-known contemporary photographer, a marvelous printer himself, worked with Ruth as her printer, printed for her for a number of years, and speaks so fondly about Ruth and their friendship and all he learned from her about printing. And and later on there were other photographers who, other photographers who printed for her. She didn't do her own printing after, I don't know, maybe after, by the time she turned 70, something like that, she stopped printing, and other artists printed with her. But I went with her one time when she was working with Saeed Nusabeh, who was her printer. I took her one time to his darkroom when they were printing, and the way they would work was very interesting because Saeed would make a master print, and Ruth would kind of tell him what she wanted, and they'd work together in the darkroom. He'd make a master print. Then she'd look at it, and then she'd say, well, let's do this, let's change this, and so on. They would maybe make several prints until she got what she wanted, and then from that master print, he would have his notations, and then he could make other prints that would be the same or similar to that. And and then she didn't sign the print unless she liked it. So unless if the multiples that he made were not up to her satisfaction, then she didn't sign it. So that's how she worked. So, you know, even though she didn't do her own printing, it was almost as if she did, because she took such a strong role in the printing side by side with her printer. So.
So that's great, Rob. I see Sherry, your hand's up again. So oh nope. Any other thoughts out there? I mean, one question I would have for you, Rob, is if we want to see more of her works, are there galleries that we could go to? Where would we find them?
Yes. Locally, the main gallery is Scott Nichols' gallery still, and he's up in Sonoma County now. He's up in the city of Sonoma on the main square. He may be moving back into the Bay Area, to Mill Valley in the near future, but he used to be downtown, but unfortunately he's up there now. So that's the main place. There's a lot of it online, but in terms of seeing the actual photographs, the other major gallery that has her work is Peter Fetterman in Los Angeles, and but locally Scott is the main person. So it's yeah, the work is not easily seen at this point, unfortunately.
Good excuse to go to Sonoma.
Yeah.
Erica raised an interesting question. We didn't talk a lot about the lifesaver photo, but the light setup on that must have been intense. Would love to have seen that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it was intriguing for me because it's from 1930, and who would have thought that lifesavers would still be around? But I'm one of their best customers because their product is actually very good for people with type 1 diabetes, as I have, for treating low blood sugars. So kind of a great homage to an important product in my life.
Yeah, and maybe not as many people have them in their pocket anymore, but in those days, a lot of people did. So, yeah.
And then Kathy is noting that the Oakland Museum of California has some of her photographs.
Oh, good.
Maybe we can go there and see them there.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, I really want to thank you. It's always great having you talk to us about photography. I know you have a deep love of it, and you're really great at conveying that. So thank you very much.
Always great. Thank you.
Great job.
Always enjoy it. Thank you.
And then we
Great
did talk.
job on it, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paco.
Paco's seal of approval.
Good.
We did talk about how if people want to experience more of your programs, you do a walking tour of the Castro neighborhood, and you've got one coming up on this Sunday, the 19th, at 11 a.m. That meets. Where does it meet, Rob?
So it meets right at Castro and Market under this big rainbow flag there in the plaza there. So it meets right there. And it's a free walking tour sponsored by San Francisco City Guides. So, and I do want to mention, we had a video which we didn't have a chance to play. It runs about 5 minutes, and it is from eBay, from YouTube. And I do recommend it. It's if you just Google Ruth Bernhard, and you'll see a few things on about her. It's fascinating to hear her talk. This was an excerpt where she's talking about the responsibility of the artist doing art, and it's part of a program. It's an excerpt of a program called the Creative Mind that was produced by KQED a number of years ago. I believe she was about 85 years old when she did this, and she's just marvelous to listen to. So I heartily recommend that you go on YouTube and look up Ruth Bernhard
Looking for it right now to see.
watch her, listen to her. Yeah.